Clinton campaign now seeming to challenge the results of the 2016 election, trying to get the results overturned after campaign chairman John Podesta goes on the record saying members of the Electoral College should be briefed on Russian interference before they cast their votes for president. Welcome to the Kelly File. I'm Shannon Bream in for Megyn Kelly. This could be the single biggest development on the 2016 election since Hillary Clinton conceded to Donald Trump. Exactly 1 week before the Electoral College is scheduled to formalize the vote for Donald Trump as our next president, a bombshell from the man who ran Clinton's campaign. John Podesta siding with 10 of the electors who are now demanding information on the Russians and Mr. Trump. Podesta saying, quote, "The bipartisan electors' letter raises very grave issues involving our national security. Electors have a solemn responsibility under the Constitution, and we support their efforts to have their questions addressed." In moments, we'll be joined by representatives of both campaigns, Karen Finney and Katrina Pearson. But we begin with Trace Gallagher reporting from our West Coast newsroom. Trace.
Hi, Shannon. These 10 members of the Electoral College say it's not their duty to simply rubber stamp the Election Day results, but instead to, quote, investigate, discuss, and deliberate. So they sent a letter to Intelligence Director James Clapper asking to be given an intel briefing before they cast their votes on December 19th, writing, quote, "The elector is required to know from the intelligence community whether there are ongoing investigations into ties between Donald Trump, his campaign, or associates, and Russian government interference in the election." The electors go on to say the information will help them decide whether Mr. Trump is fit to serve as president. And the Clinton campaign is supporting this effort, marking the first time the campaign has publicly questioned the legitimacy of Trump's victory, despite repeatedly saying they would accept the results. Hillary Clinton's top political advisor, John Podesta, calls the group of electors bipartisan, but it should be noted only one of the 10 members is a Republican, and he has long been a vocal Trump critic. The other 9 are Democrats, including Nancy Pelosi's daughter, Christine. And this letter comes on the heels of this weekend's by 2 Democratic congressmen, David Cicilline of Rhode Island and Jim Himes of Connecticut, who suggest the Electoral College should consider blocking Trump's election. Watch.
What finally pushed me over the edge was when the president-elect of the United States criticized the CIA and the intelligence community. Can you imagine what the leaders in Beijing and Moscow and Tehran are thinking as they watch the next president of the United States delegitimize and criticize his own intelligence community and stand up for the defense of Russia, one of our prime adversaries?
And while the U.S. government largely believes that Russia did interfere with the campaign, there is disagreement over the motive. The CIA believes it was to help Trump. The FBI believes it was to undermine the U.S. political system. Of course, there is zero evidence the voting process itself was in any way disrupted. Shannon.
All right, Trace Gallagher, thank you very much. Joining us now, Karen Finney, who served as the Clinton campaign's senior spokesperson. Karen, thanks for joining us tonight. Let me ask you about these questions that the electors may have. 9 of the 10 come from states where Hillary Clinton won. So is this much ado about nothing? What is the point?
Well, I think let's just take a step back here, Shannon. I mean, my goodness, remember the days when the party of Ronald Reagan was talking to very toughly to Mikhail Gorbachev to tear down that wall. And now look at where we are. We are talking about Russian interference, hacking. We are talking about a broad agreement between our intelligence agencies that there was some malfeasance on the part of the Russians in their attempt to undermine our election. As you pointed out, there is some disagreement or conversation about whether or not, what the ultimate motive was. And actually, the other part of what
but doesn't that
Mr.
make
Podesta
a big difference? Because what we're hearing is from unnamed sources, so no name assigned to it. They're talking about the CIA saying they think the ultimate goal was to help Donald Trump. The FBI not going there. I mean,
CIA,
those are 2 top agencies, and they don't agree.
But remember, we're talking about a broad agreement between 17 intelligence agencies. And just one other point here,
Shannon. That Russia was involved, but Russia was also involved with going after Republicans as well.
Shannon,
and that goes to motive.
Hold on. Well, but more importantly, let me just finish one sentence. That also goes to the point that Mr. Podesta was making, and others have, which is why, in addition to the letter, the electors are asking for a briefing. all of this information at some point should be made public to the American people. I mean, we as the American people, we are the greatest democracy on the planet. We need to know if the Russians are trying to infiltrate our government in these nefarious ways. I mean, our brave men and women in our intelligence agencies and who serve in uniform, they fight to get us this kind of information and to uncover these kinds of things. And I think, their next commander-in-chief, Mr. Trump, owes it to them to not just dismiss them out of hand, but to listen to the information. And I think, again, if the electors are suggesting that part of their constitutional duty is they want to hear a briefing, they want to hear information so that they themselves feel confident.
But these are people who weren't going to vote for Trump anyway, except for one who's been a critic of him anyway. You have 9 who come from states where Hillary Clinton won. So what difference does it make to those 9?
Shannon, are you seriously suggesting, just more importantly, are you suggesting that it's not disconcerting that the Russians
not at all.
may
all
have...
I'm saying is it's not going to change their vote. I'm not saying it's not disconcerting at all. In fact, Donald Trump and a number of top GOP senators have said they will investigate this. We have Bob Corker, who heads up Senate Foreign Relations. Sure. We have McConnell. We have Graham. We have McCain. We have others saying this is not okay with us, and we want to make sure that we get to the truth.
And the fact that it's been so bipartisan is incredibly powerful. Here's the point about the electors. It's not about who they would or would not have voted for. It is about something that is much greater. And I pray that if anything comes out of all of this, in the election, it is that we as Americans come back and remember that this is part of the foundational core of our democracy. So it's not about how, who was going to vote for whom. It's about our electors saying it is our constitutional duty to know the answers to these questions. Alexander Hamilton, this was one of the very intents of creating the electors in the first place. So I see them as trying to do their job. I don't think there is an assumption that this would change the nature of the outcome of the election. And in fact, there's an opportunity here for many to actually take bold steps to stand up to Russia and right these wrongs and make sure that they don't interfere in our government and in our country in any way further.
All right. Well, I think we can all agree it's good that there is bipartisan fervor for trying to get some answers.
Absolutely.
And that we can all agree on. Karen, great to see you tonight. Thank you for joining us.
You too, Shannon.
Also tonight, Katrina Pearson served as Trump campaign national spokesperson. All right, Katrina, good to see you as well. What do you make of these concerns that really every American, people on both sides of the aisle are saying should be concerned about any foreign government that would want to try to influence our national presidential election in any way?
Well, we should be concerned about that if that were the case. What we see now, so much for accepting the election results. This is just the worst case of denial that I have ever seen. The working class voters rejected the Democrat Party this cycle. They have blamed everyone. Every week it's a new blame. First, it was FBI Director Comey. Then it was racism, sexism, misogynism, all the isms. Then they blamed the media for the coverage of the candidates. And now it's Russian infiltration of the election process. The White House today came out and said that that was not the case. They simply cannot accept the fact that they had a flawed candidate that did not have a clear message and, more importantly, could not connect with the voters. What were they thinking that the Russians did? Did Vladimir Putin call up CNN and ask them to help Hillary Clinton cheat?
We have to look at the fact that there were 17 intelligence agencies that went public and said Russia has been interfering, or those connected to Russia, because a lot of times it's not the government itself, but we know it is hackers friendly to a government, and maybe that's what happened here. But those intelligence agencies came forward and said there is no doubt to this fact that Russia is getting involved in hacking. And a lot of people will say, listen, they released information that was detrimental to the DNC, to the DCCC. It wasn't good for one side of the ticket, much more than it wasn't good for the other side of the ticket.
Well, of course. There's hacking that goes on all the time. But what are they actually saying? In order for this to have worked, they would have had to interfere with the election process itself. That's the accusation that's being made here. And that's what the White House came out today and said did not happen. And that is the problem. We have a situation where you have a party that lost handedly and they simply can't cope with it. But you know what's really happening here? Perhaps this Russian hacking fiasco is just a distraction from a motion that was filed just last week by Judicial Watch, wanting to unseal the video depositions of Hillary Clinton's top staffers in the FBI investigation of her emails. There is nothing going on with this election process. The White House came out today and said it, and that's exactly what the candidate
But you know, the president has ordered that he wants a full review of all Russian hacking back even to the 2008 election when there were breaches involving the Obama and McCain campaigns. He wants it all done before he leaves office on January 20th. So clearly he thinks there's an issue, and there are a number of people, like I said, on both sides of the aisle who have expressed grave concerns and have come to the conclusion that Russia did have some undue influence on not necessarily hacking into voting machines and changing votes, but changing voters' perceptions about the two candidates. And that's significant when people are going to the polls in a tight race.
Well, I think back in 2008, 2009, that was China. But we absolutely should know what's going on with regards to cyber warfare, because it is a problem. And we don't want those types of things to be influencing the election. And you know, some of these hacks, they don't even know where they came from. There is discrepancies among the intelligence agencies about exactly who did what and when. There is no evidence, or maybe there is evidence. We don't know. The election process,
to what they said about those 17 agencies joining together.
Absolutely.
Now,
but just today, the letter that was sent to Clapper today is saying you need to tell us what's going on here, because there are discrepancies among the intelligence communities about what actually happened.
Information
at the end of the day,
are good things.
Oh, absolutely. But at the end of the day, the election process itself was not interfered with, and the White House came out today and said that.
All right, we got to leave it there, Katrina. Thank you.
Great to be here.
All right, when then candidate Trump worried about the election being rigged, the media lost its mind. You remember that well. Up next, Howie Kurtz shows us how the media is reacting to these comments about rigging from the Democrats. And then Governor Huckabee and Austin Goolsbee join us on worries the Clinton camp is putting our entire system at risk. Plus, Judge Napolitano warned months ago that the whole Russian allegation could be a red herring. He's just ahead to explain why.
You know, every time Donald thinks things are not going in his direction, he claims whatever it is rigged against him. So we've been around for 240 years. We've had free and fair elections. We've accepted the outcomes when we may not have liked them. He is denigrating. He's talking down our democracy. And I, for one, am appalled that somebody who is the nominee of one of our two major parties would take that kind of position.
That was Secretary Clinton not even 8 weeks ago, slamming President-elect Trump for daring to suggest that the election results might just be up for debate. But Mrs. Clinton was far from alone. The larger media never missed a beat when it came to denouncing Mr. Trump for declaring the election was in danger of being rigged. Watch this.
Donald Trump has forfeited any right to serve as the American president because he has violated one of the basic tenets of our democracy.
It's dangerous, I think, in the future for this, in some ways, for our country. People are really feeling like this election is going to be rigged.
The real danger here is that when Trump lies to his supporters about the others who are trying to steal the election, some of his supporters believe him. Mr. Trump, think of your children. America is great partly because everyone accepts the results of elections for decades in the past and hopefully for decades to come. Inventing a conspiracy theory is no way to make America great again.
Now that November 8th has come and gone with results some in the media seem to outright despise, we've noticed outlets like the New York Times have done a complete 180 on that rigging claim. Back in October, the Times wrote top Republicans must reject the ridiculous notion that a national election can be rigged. But now they're singing a different tune, proclaiming failing to resolve the questions about Russia would feed suspicion among millions of Americans that a dominant theme of his candidacy turned out to be true. The election was indeed rigged. Here to break down the About Face is Media Buzz host Howie Kurtz. Good to see you tonight, Howie.
Hi, Shannon.
All right, so tell us a little bit about this. I mean, where are we going here? Because you read the papers, we all read them 8 weeks ago, and now we're hearing a different tune today.
The media went haywire when Trump used to talk again and again about a rigged election because the feeling was he was just setting up an alibi for himself after Hillary Clinton inevitably would win the race. Well, now, as you just quoted, New York Times and other outlets saying, hey, there could be a rigged election here because of the Russian hacking allegations. The Times says there's a darkening cloud over over Trump's presidency. And a liberal Times columnist, Paul Krugman, just today says the election is tainted in part because of the hackers and in part because Hillary won the popular vote, except that this electoral college thing, it's in the Constitution.
It is. We've all read it. You've probably got your pocket Constitution. I keep one in my purse, so we know that's actually a fact. But, is there any explanation or any self-reflection by any of these media outlets, do you think, who are flip-flopping? And did they have copies of what they wrote a few weeks ago?
Self-reflection is not a great quality in the mainstream media. Otherwise, we'd be seeing a lot more hand-wringing about the way this past race was covered. And look, I take these CIA allegations of Russian hacking seriously. The fact that they were leaked anonymously to the Washington Post makes it harder to discern just what is real. It's all very murky, as often is the case in spycraft. But now that we have John Podesta, asking for the electors to get a special briefing, which is only one reason you would ask for that if you're in the Clinton campaign, and that is to get them to flip away from Donald Trump. The more the media play this up, I think the more they will be embracing a kind of a fringe theory that really could end up stealing the election from the guy who won 306 electoral votes.
But I thought the fringe was suggesting something crazy like a national election could be rigged.
Well, look, everyone knows that even if it turns out to be true, and I think there should be an investigation, that Russian hackers were trying to undermine the election, we're obviously in favor of Trump and not Hillary Clinton. The idea that this flipped the election when what really turned the election was Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, where Hillary Clinton barely campaigned in two of those states, and where Donald Trump made that connection with white working class voters who rejected the Democratic nominee. That's what turned this election. So now to try to say, well, if only it had not been for Vladimir Putin, Hillary Clinton would have won, strikes me as kind of sour grapes. But I think this is going to get quite a ride in the media before the electors finally vote, Shannon.
All right, and there's still so many unanswered questions, so we'll stay on it. We know you will. Howie, good to see you.
Indeed. Same here.
All right, here now with more. Fox News contributor, Trump supporter, and former presidential candidate himself, Governor Mike Huckabee, and former chief economist to President Obama, Austin Goolsbee. Good to see you both, gentlemen.
Hi, Sam. Thank you very much, Shannon.
All right, Austin, I want to start with you. What do you make of this? And of course, one of the things that Donald Trump said in response this weekend was there have been a litany of excuses. This is just the latest one. And what it came down to was the polling showed people didn't trust her, they didn't like her, and they didn't connect with her in the important Rust Belt. The votes are there. We're not talking about the Russians hacking into machines and changing votes, right?
I think that's right. And I'm not advocating that they go down and say, let's try to reverse the Electoral College vote. I think that would be weird. I think that you would have justifiable howls from the Republican side about doing that. But I think the way you have portrayed it, that this is a flip-flop by the media, I think is very misleading. Because the thing that Donald Trump was condemned for, rightfully, by people on both parties, was for alleging that the vote was rigged if he lost with no evidence ahead of time. That's totally different. And if there actually is evidence of foreign influence, we should investigate it. That's not the same thing at all.
What he got so much pushback for was during that debate with their own Chris Wallace, when he said, "Will you accept the results of the election?" And he said, "Well, I'm going to wait and see. We're going to see what happens." He wasn't even talking about anything being rigged, and that's when we saw Mrs. Clinton go on and say, "You have to accept the results even when you don't like them." And she talked about how denigrating it was to the system to suggest that there was something untoward when there was no evidence of it.
To suggest that it is rigged with no evidence before the outcomes, and to literally say, if I do not win, then it is rigged by my opponent,
or I'm going to wait and see.
That is outrageous. This is totally different. There's actual evidence from the CIA that the Republican leader of the Senate and the Republican leader of the House say needs to be investigated. That's a totally different situation.
All right, Governor Huckabee, I want to bring you in here because what we're getting are leaks from an unnamed source who says they were debriefed or part of this briefing by the CIA, saying that, yes, everybody agrees that there was some untoward action by Russian actors, potentially linked directly to the Russian government, but to make the leap that they somehow changed the election results is a big one.
That's beyond any belief. I mean, you have to believe in unicorns to go there. The fact is, there was allegations that the Russians may have hacked into the DNC computers, but there's no evidence whatsoever that it had any impact on the election. My gosh, we just got word tonight that they recounted the votes in Wisconsin, and Donald Trump had 162 more votes than he had when they first counted. This is so unbelievable, and I'm ashamed for the Democrats and the press, but then I repeat myself, because when the New York Times has to dig out to the bottom of the birdcage to see what they wrote 8 weeks ago when they were whining about how terrible it was Donald Trump was saying something, and then they turn around and say the same thing, you know what the evidence of a rigged election was? The exposure of the DNC emails that showed that it was rigged against Bernie Sanders and toward Hillary Clinton. It was a fixed deal, and that was one of the things. I think the more amazing thing is that those DNC emails revealed just the contempt that Hillary and her chief lieutenants had for the working class people of America, and that's why she lost. And Democrats need to accept the results of a fair and free election, which is what they lectured Republicans about.
Austin, really quickly before we have to go, I mean, clearly those revelations were not good for her or the DNC.
Yes, I agree. I'm not disagreeing with the governor. I do not think that they should be going and trying to persuade the Electoral College to change their vote. I think that's just a bridge too far. I do think that they should investigate Russian interference in our political process. The Russians are trying to interfere in Western European political voting process, and that is a big deal, and it should be investigated. And to allege that that's the same thing as when Donald Trump was saying that the election was stolen when there was no evidence and before it took place, I just think is a different subject.
Yeah, and there's still a debate about whether here or there was that same evidence of Russia being able to do that. So far, none clear that we know of. Governor, just a one-word answer, yes or no. Are you in favor, as many of your GOP counterparts, the senators on the Hill, say that they want to see this investigated? Would you sign on to that?
It just depends on what they want to investigate. I mean, that's the real answer. And that's not a yes or no, but the yes or no is, well, yes, investigate whether Russia is hacking, but do something about cyber defense. Don't try to overturn the results of elections. People have voted. It's over. Yeah. These guys lost.
All right, we'll leave it there. Governor, Austin, good to see you both. Thank you. Good to see you. Is it possible that it wasn't the Russians behind all this election hacking? Well, Judge Napolitano raised that possibility months ago, and he's here to explain why. Plus, Buck Sexton and Matt Bennett are here on the new fight between the president-elect and the intelligence community. Stick around.
According to the Washington Post, the CIA has concluded that Russia intervened in the election to help you win the presidency. Your reaction?
Breaking tonight, President-elect Donald Trump's rumored pick for Deputy Secretary of State is weighing in on Russia's alleged involvement in election hacking. Former UN Ambassador John Bolton tells Fox News it's possible some other entity is behind the hacks in what could be a false flag operation. Mr. Bolton went on to clarify this morning that this is not what he meant. He didn't mean it was about the Obama administration, at least. Joining me now is Judge Andrew Napolitano, Fox News senior judicial analyst, who actually raised the possibility of the hacking coming from inside our government back in August. Do you have a crystal ball, Judge?
Well, Shannon, good evening. It's always pleasant to be with you. I raised it then because former management officials in the NSA, now retired, had raised it and had suggested that there was animus against Mrs. Clinton in the NSA, and that NSA people who know all, see all, they can tell every hack there is, and they know about all the leaks because they have records of it, because they control all the fiber optics in the country, would know about this. Now, we have to get some basics down. There's hacking and there's leaking. Leaking is when someone internally or remotely reveals information improperly into a third party. That's what happened to Mrs. Clinton. It happened with a drumbeat. Day after day after day, there were 48,000 emails that were leaked. Hacking is when someone remotely enters an information system and alters it remotely so that the operator of the system doesn't know there was an alteration. That is what did not happen here. No matter what the New York Times and the Washington Post are opining this morning, they cannot point to any evidence whatsoever that the outcome of the election was altered by foreign agents. There certainly was leaking. That leaking could have been facilitated by people in the NSA, by a rogue in Mrs. Clinton's campaign, or by a foreign entity. But that was a leak. That was not a hack.
Well, Judge, we did have some polling around the time that all of these leaks were bubbling up, that there were people who said their vote would potentially be changed because of some of the things that were revealed in the leaking. So in that way, could you argue that Russia did impact the election?
If there was evidence that Russia did the leaking. But the leaking probably came from someone on the inside or someone who had access to the fiber optics through which the communications ran. That means somebody in the NSA or somebody who once was in the NSA. How do we know this? We know it because, for better or for worse, whatever you think of him, Edward Snowden revealed all this and revealed the nature and extent of the NSA's tentacles in all of the fiber optic traffic in the United States of America. Not to get too much in the weeds. The leaking could not have occurred without the NSA knowing about it. And if anybody hacked in and altered internal systems, the NSA would know who the hacker was and when they did it.
Okay.
We haven't heard any of that.
Judge Napolitano, always great to see you.
Good to see you.
All right, this Russian hacking or leaking claim also led to new controversy after the president-elect went on Fox News Sunday and dismissed a CIA report on Russian interference.
I think it's ridiculous. I think it's just another excuse. I don't believe it. I don't know why. And I think it's just, they talked about all sorts of things. Every week it's another excuse. We had a massive landslide victory, as you know, in the Electoral College. I guess the final numbers are now at 306, and she, down to a very low number. No, I don't believe that at all.
All right, now some of the members of the intelligence community are reportedly taking issue with those comments. I'm joined now by Buck Sexton, former CIA analyst and host of the Buck Sexton Show on the Blaze Radio, and Matt Bennett, former deputy assistant to President Clinton. Good to see you both.
Thank you.
All right, my head's going to explode with all these explanations, and you all understand the cyber warfare better than I do. But Matt, the distinction is important if we're talking about going in, changing votes, rigging election machines, voting machines, that kind of thing. It's different than saying material was leaked that was unflattering to the candidates.
No question. And the point that you made in the earlier segment is exactly right. We don't have any evidence that anybody messed around with the voting machines or the actual vote. We do now have evidence from 17 intelligence agencies, and with all due respect to the judges, retired, folks from the IC, the agencies themselves are reporting that it is the Russians that went in, got information from the DNC and from Podesta's emails, and made those public. And that is extraordinarily dangerous for a hostile foreign country to be trying to muck around with our elections. They probably didn't impact the outcome, but they definitely were trying to have impact, and that's really scary.
And Buck, people on both sides of the aisle are saying every American should care about this and should be worried and want answers.
Everyone should care, but the question is to what extent? And also, why do Democrats care so much about this at this point in time? I think it's quite obviously because of the results of the election. This is part of a much broader narrative, this notion that Russia did something that may have influenced some people at some point in the election, that Donald Trump is an illegitimate president, that he didn't actually win the election, whether it's the fake news that we were hearing about for quite a while after Trump won, or that the FBI director threw the election for Trump. There's been this slew of stories, one after another, all of them with the same intent, and that is to delegitimize, to essentially unelect Donald Trump as president in the eyes of the American people, to take that "not my president" meme, which became very popular the day after the election, and make it real for people. Oh, he's not actually your president because Russia got him elected. People are writing this. This is written today in the New York Times. This has been written elsewhere in editorial pages, that it's not a real election, that Russia threw this for him. That's nonsense. There is a consensus within the IC that Russia was involved in this. That's been out there for quite some time. What Russia's intent was, and also the extent of its involvement, those are still open questions, but the media is trying to rush with the narrative now because it will do so much damage to Trump in the meantime.
Well, Matt, I see you shaking your head over here, so we'll give you a chance to respond. But the New York Times, even writing about this, said it is not clear that the intent was to go in and influence this election for Donald Trump. That's coming from the New York Times.
That's right. We don't have the faintest idea what their intent was. We have some circumstantial evidence. I mean, it is clear that the people around Trump and Trump himself are a lot more friendly to Vladimir Putin than the people that were around Hillary Clinton. And it does seem that they would have interest in helping Trump get elected, but we don't know that for sure. What we need, and I think what most responsible Democrats want, is a real investigation into this effort on the part of a major global adversary to impact our elections. That is a huge thing. If the shoe were on the other foot, if Clinton had been elected and this were alleged about her, Republicans would rightly be going bananas, and we need some sort of investigation.
Well, I got to think if Trump was making these allegations having lost, they would not be received well.
No, they wouldn't be received well, but let's keep in context the likelihood that anything actually came from this. It's been known for some time. And this is not new, by the way, that foreign countries would try to influence, whether overtly or covertly, another country's election. And in this context, in this case, sure, we should investigate and take a look at it. But we're going to find out that this didn't actually change anything. But it does give the Democrats a tiny violin that they can play about how sad they are about Donald Trump winning the election.
Matt didn't bring his tonight. It's packed up. Good to see you both.
Good to see you.
Thanks for coming in, gentlemen. All right, we are now hearing reports that the Senate wants to kill parts of the Iran deal, and we're told that move, though, could inadvertently put 100,000 U.S. jobs on the chopping block. Mark Thiessen and Robert Wolf are next on the risks on both sides of this debate. Developing tonight, new questions about whether the Senate should kill parts of the Iran deal. That move could kill a Boeing deal to sell some 80 jets for nearly $17 billion, a deal that reportedly supports 100,000 U.S. jobs. Our chief national correspondent, Ed Henry, has details from Washington. Good evening, Ed.
Good to see you, Shannon. Well, it was the president-elect back on Twitter today going after another defense contractor, Lockheed Martin, about cost overruns associated with the F-35. Now, that comes as, yes, he may be girding for yet another big battle with Boeing. You'll remember last week he took to Twitter to go after the defense contractor because of cost overruns allegedly associated with a brand spanking new Air Force One. The company's stock took a major hit because of all of that, and the sticker shock that Mr. Trump was talking about on Twitter. He said, quote, Boeing is building a brand new 747 Air Force One for future presidents, but costs are out of control, more than $4 billion. Cancel order. Well, as you noted, there may now be an even bigger fight over the nearly $17 billion agreement that Boeing is forging with Iran to sell them new planes. The door, of course, is open on that kind of trade because of President Obama's broader nuclear deal with Tehran. But remember, Mr. Trump vowed during the campaign he would rip that deal to pieces.
My number one priority is to dismantle the disastrous deal with Iran. I know deal making, and let me tell you, this deal is catastrophic for America, for Israel, and for the whole of the Middle East.
Now, Boeing knows they have an uphill battle here, so they are sort of putting their lobbying message out in a language that Mr. Trump may understand, making it all about, yes, U.S. jobs. A Boeing statement saying, quote, today's agreement will support tens of thousands of U.S. jobs directly associated with production and delivery of the 777 and nearly 100,000 U.S. jobs in the U.S. aerospace value stream for the full course of deliveries. The first airplanes under the agreement are scheduled for delivery in 2018. Here's the bottom line. Boeing realizes, think about all of the PR that the president-elect tried to get out of saving roughly 1,000 jobs involving Carrier in Indiana. This is 100,000 jobs at stake, 100 times what Donald Trump was talking about just a week ago. Shannon.
Right you are. Ed Henry, great to see you from Washington.
Good to see you.
And now here with more. Mark Thiessen is a Fox News contributor and former chief speechwriter to President George W. Bush. And Robert Wolf is a Fox News contributor and economic advisor to President Obama. Good to see you both.
Good to see you, Shannon.
All right, Mark. We have U.S. jobs hanging here in the balance, but there are a lot of people who say they don't want a penny going to a recognized state sponsor of terrorism. Money is fungible. It goes other places, as do planes.
And not only is money fungible, but planes are fungible apparently, because this is not just an innocuous deal for some commercial aircraft to the Iranian regime. Iran Air is a tool of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. These Boeing planes will not simply be ferrying commercial passengers and cargo. They're going to be ferrying Iranian troops, Iranian weapons, Iranian terrorists, paramilitary operatives around the world to destabilize the Middle East and undermine U.S. interests and kill innocent people. Iran Air has been sanctioned repeatedly by the U.S. Treasury Department. They have been using Iran Air jets to ferry rockets and weapons to Hezbollah and other groups since the 1980s. If you want to know, where does Hezbollah get the rockets that they use to fire over the border and kill innocent Israeli women and children? They get them through Iran Air. So I don't think Boeing workers want to be producing the planes that the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps is using to ship weapons to Hezbollah and to the Assad regime that's killed 500,000 people.
Robert, how do you respond to that? Because even though we're talking about saving jobs here, there are lives that are put at stake by we know terrorism acts that come out of this country. Why do we want to help them with anything?
Well, listen, there are no sanctions today, and Boeing's a public company. They're a global company, and they're working with OFAC, and so they have the ability to trade. And unfortunately, whether we like it or not, if they don't sell them, Airbus will. And so the question is, does Boeing have to continue to do commerce around the globe with those countries that are not sanctioned? The answer is yes. Once the P5+1 lifted the sanctions, countries are going to do business with them. Boeing's not going to be the only U.S. company that's going into Iran. And so the answer is today, it gains tens of thousands of jobs, 100,000 plus jobs if you look at what's from off the assembly line, so vendors, procurement. And at the end of the day, listen, when I was at UBS, we did not do business with those countries that were sanctioned, and those countries that were not sanctioned, we did. And that's how a public company has to act. And obviously, you have to look at this.
Robert, should there be a greater moral good, a greater moral call, regardless of commerce and bottom lines and dollars?
Well, the answer is yes, and they were working with the U.S. government, who was part of this deal. They're also using no Exim Bank financing, so it's not as if they're being financed by the U.S., but there's tens of thousands of jobs to build these planes. Now, if President-elect Trump decides to go differently, like he did in that speech, that's one thing. But you should know, Secretary of Defense that he's talking about, General Mattis, has said it's unlikely we're going to reverse that deal. So, we have to right now assume it's business as usual.
Okay, and really quickly, Mark, I want to ask you, because we know Boeing is a top military contractor. It's one of the things that Trump used, allegedly, when it came to United Technologies and Carrier. When they do a lot of business with the U.S. government, you do have more leverage. Do you think it happens with Boeing?
I think he has all the leverage he needs. He just has to reimpose the sanctions in Congress. There's a bill in the House to kill this deal. The Senate can take it up, and it can be killed. And look, Airbus is not going to come in and do this because they have 10% American-made products, so they're covered by the same sanctions. And the fact is, the Treasury Department has said these people use Iran Air to ferry weapons to terrorists. We don't want to be part of that.
That's not in dispute. All right, gentlemen, good to see you both. Thank you. All right, just when you're trying to wrap up that Christmas shopping, there is a new warning that bone-chilling temperatures are about to hit much of the U.S. Plus, the Kelly File digs into an investigation that reportedly uncovers harrowing conditions at abortion clinics across the country. This all comes as Planned Parenthood wonders if they're going to be the first casualty in a new abortion war. That's next. Breaking tonight, millions of Americans bracing themselves for some of the coldest temperatures this century. Forecasters are warning that a polar vortex is about to grip much of the central and eastern U.S., bringing dangerously cold temperatures and wind chills that could dip to 30 to 40 degrees below zero in some places. The northern plains expected to see the worst of it. It comes just days after a brutal snowstorm hit the Great Lakes and Northeast, causing school closures, car crashes, and a whole lot of canceled flights. New reaction tonight to a pro-life group's latest fight to expose what it calls horrific abortion clinic conditions across 32 states. It's all part of the group's effort to rebuke the Supreme Court for loosening abortion restrictions back in June. So what did they find? Trace Gallagher has details live from L.A. Hi, Trace.
Hi, Shannon. The 135-page report by the anti-abortion group Americans United for Life does include graphic details, but the group says the goal is to compel state legislators into pushing for new restrictions on abortion. Last summer, the Supreme Court struck down a Texas anti-abortion law that mandated abortion clinics have the same standards as surgical centers, and doctors who perform abortions have admitting privileges at nearby hospitals. Critics called the law a sham and say it cut the number of abortion clinics in half. In his majority opinion, Justice Stephen Breyer said for women, the medical benefits did not justify the burden they placed on abortion access. But Americans United for Life says it now has found horrific abortion clinic conditions in 32 states, like West Virginia, where a doctor reportedly failed to fully remove an aborted fetus from the mother's uterus. In California, a woman who had a severe reaction to anesthesia died because the doctor allegedly failed to recognize the toxicity and then failed to respond. And a Florida clinic failed to provide an adequate area for cleaning and sterilizing instruments. Pro-choice advocates say the examples are cherry-picked and extremely rare. What is not in dispute is that because of Donald Trump's victory, the pro-life movement is emboldened, and for proof, you need only look to Ohio, where the legislature just passed a bill banning abortions after a heartbeat is detected. That's at roughly 6 weeks before some women even know they're pregnant. Governor John Kasich has not said if he will sign that bill. Shannon.
Thank you, Trace, and we'll be right back. Forbes magazine names Meghan's new book Settle for More among its list of the 2016 top 10 nonfiction books for leaders and entrepreneurs. Here are just a few of the reasons why. Michelle Golden tweets, Megyn Kelly, thank you for igniting my fire within. It is never too late. Love Settle for More and picked up a few more for gifts. A good holiday idea. Karen Moore sent this message with the attached picture. Earmarked dozens of pages, added a touch of Sharpie. Well loved and full of wisdom, warmth, and wit. Hashtag Settle for More. And Jessica George says, I laughed and cried every step of the way through your book. Thank you for your transparency and inspiration. Hashtag Settle for More. Thanks for watching. I'm Shannon Bream. This is The Kelly File.